This is the problem of despotism. That's why despotism is, or even just authoritarianism, is all powerful and brittle at the same time. It's because it creates the circumstances of its own undermining. The information gets worse. The sycophants get greater in number. The corrective mechanisms become fewer. And the mistakes become much wider and much more consequential.
We've been hearing from voices both from the past and the present telling us that the reason for what has happened is, as George Kennan said, the great blunder of eastward expansion of NATO. A modern realist historian like John Mearsheimer tells us that a great deal of the blame for what we're witnessing now must go to the United States, that he calls it the great strategic blunder of the post-war era. So I thought we'd begin by your analysis of that argument.
What we have today in Russia is not some kind of surprise. It's not some kind of deviation from a historical pattern. Way before NATO existed in the 19th century, Russia looked like this. It had an autocrat, it had repression, it had militarism, it had suspicion of foreigners in the West. This is a Russia we know, and it's not a Russia that arrived yesterday or arrived in the 1990s. It's not a response to actions of the West. There are internal processes in Russia that account for where we are today. George Kennan was unbelievably important scholar, practitioner, person in our country and culture, the greatest Russia expert who ever lived. But I just don't think blaming the West is the right analysis for where we are today.
When you talk about the internal dynamics of Russia historically, it reminds me of a piece that you wrote and was published in Foreign Affairs 6 years ago, and it began like this. For half a millennium, Russian foreign policy has been characterized by soaring ambitions that have exceeded the country's capabilities. Beginning with the reign of Ivan the Terrible in the 16th century, Russia managed to expand at an average rate of 50 square miles per day for hundreds of years, eventually covering 1/6 of the Earth's landmass. And then say these high water marks aside, Russia has almost always been a relatively weak great power. So if you could expand on that,